Welcome. Welcome to Wharton Moneyball. Welcome to a full hour of sports analytics here on the Wharton Podcast Network. This is Cade Massey hosting this week with two of my longtime collaborators and good friends, Eric Bradlow and Shane Jensen. Our fourth co-host, Adi Wyner, is away this week doing Adi Wyner things. He'll be back. As you guys know, some combination of us are here almost every week of the year, pushing 49, 50 weeks of the year, have been for more than 12 years now. Delighted to roll in here and get a little time talking sports analytics with these guys. It's Tuesday afternoon. The show will go up sometime Wednesday. This is our usual slot. We're going to flip it this week. We usually do guests in the first half hour. This week, we're going to do a guest in the second half hour. That guest, Jaffe, one of the best sports analytics-oriented baseball writers out there for FanGraphs. We'll talk with Jay in the second half of the show, talk more baseball in the second half of the show. Till then, open lines, as we used to say when we were running this thing live. Gentlemen, afternoon to you. How are things, Eric? From points unknown, Shane, I think from home, and I'm coming in from Austin. What's up, guys?
All good. Great sports time of the year. A lot going on with NBA, NHL, MLB's in full swing. We have the French Open tennis going on right now. Of course, the World Cup's about to start. So a lot of good things going on.
Well, Shane and I need to talk a little hockey. Shane, back to adulting. I don't know if this is adulting or not, but I had this exchange. I have a buddy in Durham who's a Hurricanes guy. He's kind of a come to it lately hockey guy like me. He's a hick like me, grew up playing football and basketball and not hockey. Now he's into it.
It's not the most natural sport for that particular region.
It's not, nor is it for West Texas, but we love it now. And we were talking last night because he was suffering through this game as Carolina couldn't quite get it past the Canadians until late. And I'm like totally enjoying it because I only marginally care about the outcome. And the thing is, here's the weird, I 100%, no question, enjoyed that game more than every Sabres game or Penguins game I watched this season. Like this playoffs. Like,
yeah,
I cared about the Pens in round one. I cared about the Sabres in round one.
And you feel like that degrades kind of your viewing experience?
It's worse. It's a worse viewing experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've suffered through as a Patriots fan for the last 20 years. No sympathy from you guys, by the way.
No,
that I've had to watch all these Super Bowls that have really mattered to me.
So by the way, Adi Wyner has arrived. Let's say a little Adi unexpectedly sliding in here from God knows where. I think he's way overseas, but Adi, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Adi, we're going to have Jay in the second half of the show, so we're talking a little hockey to top the show. Sorry,
Eric, to follow up on what you were saying, I have found like this hockey playoffs has been extra delightful for me, and I don't know if it's partly the level of play, which I think has been excellent. I've really enjoyed the games themselves, but it's also, I don't dislike any of the teams remaining. Like I would be kind of fine. I mean, I guess I'd sort of built in my mind this like Carolina Colorado finals, which it doesn't look like we're going to get after all. But
right.
But I'm fairly. I'm fine with everything now that the Oilers are out of it.
You've had two bad seasons because the Oilers have been there to the finals the last 2 years.
I don't, it's like, it's kind of, I kind of celebrate Oilers Elimination Day in the same way I celebrate Yankees Elimination Day every year. And unfortunately, with both those teams, it often is very late in the game that I celebrate that.
Right. Okay. Eric's been trying to jump in.
No. I was just going to point out that I find it interesting that you're as excited as you are about hockey, but you also made another statement, which I would make about most sports. I find it extremely difficult to watch most sports, but maybe hockey less so when I don't actually care about the outcome of the game. So there's something, I agree with you, there is something exciting about hockey, especially 2-2 games late in it, etc., where like, except for the Super Bowl, like if you just show me some random NFL game, I don't know, the Texans are playing the Panthers or something like that. I love football. I mean, it's probably my favorite sport, but I don't know. I'm not that excited to flip on the Texans and the Panthers or, some random NBA game in the middle of the
Hey, don't be so harsh. Don't harsh on our boy, Eric Eager. Come on. You care about the Panthers now. Now you care about the Panthers.
Now we do. Now, can I ask you a question? Because I've always had a hard time watching hockey on television and found it just a delightful game to go to, more than delightful, super exciting to be at.
It's actually easier to follow it on like I feel like unlike some sports, it's easier to follow it in person. Like you
Yeah.
can track
Yeah.
the puck better,
Yeah,
actually visually
it's a
inside.
huge gap.
It's hard on TV for some of that. Yeah.
It's a very big gap, and I think it's interesting because one of the things about football, the ascendance in America of football as the national sport, basically parallels the growth of television because it is ideal. I mean, I've been offered tickets to go see the Eagles games, and I'm like, no, I think I'm going to watch it home on my big screen and not have to worry about 2 hours of leaving the stadium. And it's just like, I'm going to watch it.
Yeah,
at
and I
home.
feel like
Adi,
you focus on.
we have to get you to a college football game because the
I can't
atmosphere
wait.
of a college football game is an entirely different thing. And that's back to hockey. The game last night, the Carolina-Montreal game was in Montreal. It was the first Montreal game of this round. And they have been incredible throughout the playoffs whenever they play at home. I mean, obviously the Montreal folks, Quebecois or whatever they're called, are like phenomenal for hockey. And that atmosphere is just unbelievable. So Adi, every now and then it's worth going. Forget about the view or whatever. It's just the atmosphere of the game. And that happens with college football a lot.
Well, I have to say, I've been to college football, not big college football, but as a student, I used to go to the Yale games. Of course, I would sit there and discuss math problems with my friends. That's what we would do. But when we went, it's a true story. But when we went to the hockey games, we did not do that. Those were super exciting. The Yale hockey games.
Yeah, at the Whale.
At the Whale, yeah,
back in the day.
It was fantastic.
I think it also helps that the Ivies are kind of more.
They're competitive in hockey.
Well, last night, one thing that jumped out last night, Carolina won. It was the third game of the series. Carolina's supposed to, be the big favorite. And Montreal goes down to Raleigh and takes the first game, and they go back. So Carolina, they outplayed them last night. Remember, they had a 10-day rest, and we talked about what the impact would be. And they seriously outplayed them last night. By the end of the game, the expected goals was like 5.1 to 1 point something.
Yeah.
Wow. The game was tied.
Think about. Yeah.
The game was tied 2-2 deep into the first period of overtime, and Carolina wins it 3-2. The expected goals by the end of the game was 5-1. That's how badly the Hurricanes outplayed the Canadiens, but just barely squeaked by.
No, it's made me because I feel like Carolina in general has been. I mean, they're on a dominant looking run if you just look at outcome, 10-1 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But 4 of those, it's like that's based on a 4-0 record in overtime.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of think, like, in part of, most of me, I'm like, oh, well, overtime is just completely random. It's a coin flip, right? But maybe Carolina, Montreal, it's like Carolina, if you're like a lopsidedly good team, and you're having trouble getting ahead, maybe you just need more time in the game to kind of those difference in Poisson rates to realize,
It's a nice point. Yep. Right.
I'm going to jump in. I know Eric has had his hand up, but I'm learning more about hockey, and there's and the depth and the differences in the lines does suggest that maybe there's less of a coin flip in overtime because of that. You can basically have your top lines play more often. Maybe they don't. I don't know enough to know exactly how the details go, but that would be my hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true because and this is something Tulsky told us whenever we talked to him a couple of months ago. We were talking about what seems like special, playoff overtime hockey feels special. And he's like, I don't know, guy. Basically, these are my words. I don't know, guys. The players are so tired by then.
Yeah,
they can't be working as hard as you think. They're just worn out.
Top lines more exclusively in overtime. You better end that overtime quick, I guess.
Right, exactly.
But both teams are kind of going through that same exhaustion kind of level. Kind of performance degrade, I guess.
Eric, jump in here.
Yeah, your 5-1 expected goals question made me think of something metric statistically. So I assume expected goals in hockey are based on location and shots taken, correct?
Yes.
Assuming that's true, is there any reason we would need another metric to measure goalie performance than the difference between expected goals and actual goals?
Well, yes, because I don't think expected goals takes into consideration the position of other players, and the position of other players has a lot to do with goalie performance. So guys get blocked all the time.
Do you think if we got more sophisticated in measuring expected goals, then the answer, like in the limit, would be no?
Yeah, right. It seems like that's
in the limit,
right.
if you could track the trajectory of the puck and kind of have like a real evaluation, yes, I think then you'd probably get almost all of the residual out, like that would I think be basically.
Well, as long as you have to have some sense of what the goalie can see and what he can't see. So if he's got a clean, unobstructed view, that's one thing. But if he's got the other team's got a big guy in front, and one of their guys is trying to lean on him, and he can barely look around, and the puck comes over his right shoulder, he didn't even see it. That happens all the time.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of a 3D model of all players and puck, right? Like if that's kind of the limit, kind of both on the data and kind of modeling side, I feel like that would get essentially all of it.
But you're right. That's a good point, Eric. Like that, you've basically defined. You have the perfect expected goals model whenever you can take the residual against actual goals as the mark of goalie performance. And I think we're some distance. Well, I don't know about some distance.
That was my point, but you said it much better than I did. I like the way you said that.
Can I just interject about some of the talks I've seen about expected goal in soccer, professional highest level soccer, is it doesn't seem to be much residual value attributable to the shooter. In other words, if you look at expected goals versus expect actual goals and look at it from the offensive side, you'd expect some players to consistently outperform their expected goals. And the bottom line is
conditional on location.
Yeah, everything you would put into
stuff
expected
like
goals.
that. The kind of random effect of player is not. There's no players that really seem to stand out.
So in soccer, I wouldn't say no. I'm about to make my one exception. After controlling for everything, basically there is no player except for one, and he sticks out like a sore thumb, and that's Messi. So he's just great.
Oh, good
and
Lord.
Everybody else is great at taking shots. I mean, getting to make them, that's where their genius is, but they don't seem to score them more frequently than the XG.
Guys, you're the statisticians. How well can we say something like that? We can say there aren't reliable individual differences, and that's a population level conclusion. Yeah. That's different than saying there are no individuals. It's much harder to say, these guys fall so far outside, they're beyond what we'd expect. I mean, there is a statistical test that we can use to say that, but that's what it would take, right?
Actually, I love it. This is great. It was exactly what I was thinking. Let's imagine we had however many, 15 players on a hockey team, whatever, times 30. So let's imagine we had roughly 450 to 500 players, each with a low power effect, because there's maybe low statistical power to assess this, or even in soccer. And the problem is every one of them shows this effect to a small degree. So there's a population level effect, but it's hard to detect any single player with that effect. And that's what you would expect. Matter of fact, my guess is there are most phenomenon in life where individual level measurement is hard to say this player or this person is so extraordinary, but there is an effect when I look at the population distribution.
Well, Adi's saying something else. Adi's saying population level, there's no effect. Well, there's a random distribution.
It all depends on who your population is. So let's be clear here. This is the top players.
I thought he was talking about players. I thought he was talking about there were no players that show an observed goals more than they're expected, except for Lionel Messi. He was talking about a player level effect.
I'm looking at a player
significant more. I mean,
significant. There's plenty who are positive, plenty who are negative. Yeah. And I'm actually just repeating. I haven't done this analysis myself. I should make that quite clear. This was a talk given at Nessus, which is a New England sports conference that takes place every other year at Harvard. And this was one of the featured talks. And it was using a lot of Bayesian statistics, as you might expect to do this kind of problem. It's the standard approach. That was the conclusion that was presented at the conference.
No, and it sounds like methodologically they're doing the right thing. I would kind of feel like that. And this is coming back to hockey. I think the similar problem in hockey is that once you start conditioning on shot location and a lot of the other type of stuff you'd like to residualize out, even for players like Messi that play a lot, I feel like all of a sudden you're really reducing your sample size if you're then going to be like, here's sort of like looking for player random effects on top of that already complicated model. So I just don't know how powerful, with the amount of data we have, how much power we really have to detect that kind of, sort of.
To put it in other words, you're saying that there's so much noise because the model is not so perfect by any stretch. We don't know what XG is. We only have XG up to the factors that we're putting in it, and that introduces an enormous amount of residual independent noise, and that makes whatever signal you're trying to find just that much harder to spot and detect.
But I'm also hearing, or at least I'm projecting onto what he's saying, another consideration, which is the ability to create XG itself
is a skill.
Can be is an individual difference, and let's not condition out XG without knowing that that's happening, because that could be what is reliable, is the ability to create more XG. By the way, this question about the population doesn't seem to have any reliable differences, but maybe one individual or two does, is something that comes up with NFL draft. So this goes back to one of the first papers I submitted to the MIT conference. It doesn't seem like teams are better, and if you take it down to the general manager level, that people aren't better than each other at the NFL draft. That doesn't mean that there's not one or two who outperform, but it's a different statistical test to ask whether one or two than if in
my
general.
Guess would be, since we're a business school, my guess would be the same would be true of people picking stocks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the classic thing. It doesn't mean there's nobody that's better. Yeah. It's hard to be systematically better also from year to year. I think what Adi's also pointing out potentially is that Massey maybe has repeatedly done this. It's not a one. My guess is it may not be a 1 year statistic that he's talking about. And, that's another possibility, is that Lionel Messi could stick out this year, but not for the previous 10 years. That's not what you're saying, I think.
No, I doubt it.
Right.
But the thing is, I mean, this is where you touch on statistical techniques. So everyone in statistics is trained to try to do what we call family-wise control, so that when we do have positives, we know that we're controlling the false positive rate at what level we call that in statistics. Now we typically use false discovery rates, and those are better ways to look at a population level characteristic, because you don't have to have the stringencies of family-wide error rates, which basically take away most of your power. So when I did like the hockey putting, I couldn't find the one putter. Sorry, I'm mixing my sports. The golf putting, I couldn't find.
Hockey putting is even more random, bro.
Yeah, hockey pucking. I couldn't find the actual 3 or 4 putters who were better and name them. I could give you a group of 5 or 6 and tell you of these 5 or 6, 4 of them are going to be better than everybody else, with a control of the error rate of about 5%. So in other words, it's kind of a funny statistics. It's like looking at stock pickers and saying, here's a bunch of people, 1 or 2 of them might actually just be lucky, but of this group, most of them are good.
That's exactly, we want to be able to say things that we can actually say and know more. And so you're saying we can say this and know more, which is fantastic. I remember that about your putting paper. Guys, one last thing on hockey. I just want to say I had a note from a longtime listener and good friend, Yuval Rotenstrike. He really ought to get associate producer credit on this show. He gives us so much feedback and so many good ideas. And I'm going to probably misrepresent what he said, but I'm going to use it to ask y'all a question. I said last week that hockey had this quality. It seems to me hockey has this quality because scoring is rare, and that it can turn on a dime. Guys can go from behind the net to scoring a goal. It happened in this past week in like 4 seconds. That there's higher frequency changes in win probability than in other sports. And I said that as a positive thing. It is something that keeps me it's hard to not pay. If you care about the game at all, it's hard to turn your attention to anything else because of that quality. And Yuval wrote and said, he basically said, I think that may be true. And that's why I don't like it as much. It's like, I don't want it to be as like a constant hazard rate that the win probability is going to change. I want to see it build up like you see it happens in football or basketball. Do you all have a side of that? Do you think we can we group sports that way? And and do people have preferences for the type of sport on that dimension?
I think the most popular sport in the world is definitely more like hockey in this. I mean, I think the hockey, just because it's even more end to end and like deflections and stuff, probably has an even greater instantaneous rate of change. But soccer is like that too, like one penalty or one like kind of like. Yeah. I mean, I feel like one the win probability can really change a lot in soccer. Kind of in like you're describing.
But it does have a build. Soccer does have this. You see guys build up over the course of a field. Now, it doesn't always happen continually, but when it does, it's like, oh, they're getting closer. There's something happening. But it's slower build than a American football drive down the field. Mm-hmm. I mean, do y'all find yourself?
I think it's less predictable. I mean, maybe that shows my soccer naivete, but I feel like during a drive down the field soccer wise, because it's back and forth, like I can less understand something's really building here versus not. It seems more random to me. Whereas like football, because it's stop and start, and because there's underlying fundamental, like, how much yardage they're getting and stuff, I feel like you can kind of get like a lot more sort of like how this is going information before the outcome is realized necessarily.
Yeah. All right. So no big reactions from Adi or Eric on that dimension. It's not resonating real strongly one way or the other. All right. Well, they're baseball guys. I mean, what is baseball? How would you characterize baseball in this respect? I mean,
unless the score's tied, or you're within a distance that you can,
and late in the game,
it doesn't have that at all. It has a sobriety about it. So
I feel like it's probably got the most bimodal kind of distribution of these rates of win probability, where for many game states, you can turn it off in the fifth inning and it's over type of thing. For like,
what does this say about me and Adi that hockey and baseball differ in the degree of sobriety? Hockey as this example is just completely off the rails, more or less.
I think both Adi and Shane's point is, if you think about baseball, how hard is it, let's say in the first 7 innings of a game, for a baseball game to be considerably beyond 90% win probability? Pretty hard. I'm just saying, I don't think baseball games get that far. Like, another way to think of it, Cade, is like almost like a control chart. You put some error bounds, and then this would be easy to do, right? Especially with things like, speaking of Jaffe and FanGraphs coming up, imagine you had win probability charts over time for various sports. You could talk about first time to hit the boundary, the number of times to hit the boundary, all kinds of things.
But I want to make just maybe a technical distinction here. We're talking about change in win probability, not necessarily win probability exceeding like 95%. Like, we're not talking about like kind of the game being guaranteed or not, because I still think baseball, though it's true that probably there's very rare kind of game states where one team has more than like a 95% chance of winning at the 7th inning. To go from that, 95, to actually kind of build in the other direction is still going to be probably pretty incremental. They got to get guys on base, and it's like they can't just hit like 3 grand slams in like a row or something like that, right? So I think sort of, I still think baseball is kind of on the slower, in terms, at least like kind of the instantaneous rate of change in that win probability, unless you are except for those kind of really close games at the end where it can swing like crazy based on one at bat.
Yeah, you got to take yourself time. You got to get that walk. You got to get that bloop. You got to get that error. You got to get that. I'm describing the 2001 World Series. I'm sorry right now, but it's a series of events.
I mean, or we could, you got to get that walk. You got to get that stolen base. You got to get that hit off Mariano. I feel like we're also describing the 2004 LCS. It's the same scenario.
So hold on, Eric. Let me jump in real quick, because Adi just used the term crescendo, and it reminds me that our friend and former dean Jeff Garrett had a whole theory of crescendo sports. Do you remember this? This is like going back to our very first year in operation, 2014. So Jeff is now the big dean at the Marshall School of Business at USC. And we need to be reminded of what Jeff's crescendo theory of sports was, because he definitely had a notion. He's a political scientist, but he had this notion about crescendo nature of sports. I hadn't thought about it in a while. Okay, Eric, you were going to jump in.
No, I was just going to build on Shane's point that is the following seems mathematically plausible, but I don't know if it's true, which is, since baseball, which we all agree, has lower incremental change in probability, it probably is not uncorrelated with the fact that it's hard to get outside certain bounds within a short period of time. And so that was going to be my point, is that those facts are related to each other in some way. And if you think in the limit, this is what assuming you agree, this is what I tell students all the time. Let's imagine that the increment at any particular time was really tiny. Then by definition, you couldn't get outside the bounds. And so it helps to build intuition. If we think about in the limit, if baseball has slower increments or smaller increments, it probably also means it will have less. It'll take longer to hit the boundary. Maybe it's hard to get farther out of the boundary, etc.
It's the summary of it is that it has greater sobriety. I think that's the
I don't think
Have
I'm
we
ever
just
going to live
invented
this
a new
down.
like a new quantitative term, a measure?
It might be
Okay.
why, though. It might be why people. I don't know that this is empirically true or not. Might be why people stay at baseball games longer
Yes.
because the win probability is never totally out of reach, and in some sense, I don't know. I'm just saying. I think there's lots of things that are implications of small increments. That's all.
Okay. So one of these days we'll have a bunch of win probability charts over the course of a game with in-game changes in win probability, and we can compare these things and see whether they match our intuitions. In the meantime, Jay Jaffe is joining us. Jay's based in Brooklyn. He's a senior writer for FanGraphs. You baseball guys know what FanGraphs is. If you're not a baseball guy, but you love sports analytics, you ought to know what FanGraphs is. It's a terrific site. It's exactly where I go if I want to find out what's going on in baseball. Jay's been there for a while. He's also written before for the Baseball Prospectus, of course, and a contributing writer for SI. He's a recurring guest on the MLB Network. He's a member of the BBWAA, and he's been a Hall of Fame voter since 2021. Notably, and it's going to come up, he's the creator of Jaws. That sounds like war, the Jaffe war score. As you've heard us talk over the years, there's multiple ways to do war. There's not one way, and there's apparently a Jay Jaffe way. The boys are going to be interested in that. Jay, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hey, thanks. Great to be back.
Love having you. My challenge in this half hour is to see how long I can keep the conversation going on topic other than Hall of Fame. We want to talk Hall of Fame, but before we get there, can you give us a little bit of your perspective on the season so far? We're far enough in to have some thoughts on things. I know you wrote about the Phillies, I think last week or earlier this week. The Phillies experiencing a nice little turnaround with Mattingly. I'd be curious about the Braves. Are the Braves? What chances do you give them against the Dodgers? What else do you see?
Yeah, we've seen, as with every season, I think we've seen some surprisingly strong starts and some surprisingly weak ones. I mean, the strong ones this year, the Braves are obviously one of them. The Phillies turn around after a atypically weak start, firing the manager and then suddenly going on a roll with Don Mattingly. Big story. The Red Sox stumbling out of the gate and then firing Alex Cora. Maybe we should have already lowered our expectations for Boston, given what's transpired there over the last half decade, but they did make the playoffs last year. Still, this feels more like an extension of what we've seen in what I'll call the post Mookie Betts era than the powerhouse AL East rivalry era that preceded it. Dodgers off to another strong start, although again being given chase by the Padres. It sets up I think a very compelling, continues a very compelling rivalry that has so far withstood the Padres' instability over the last few years when it comes to managerial changes and now a pending ownership change. That's interesting there. At times we've had everybody in the NL Central above 500 and everybody but the leader in the AL Central below 500. We seem to be witnessing a changing of the guard in the AL West, where the Astros look like they've reached the end of their long run atop the division. But the Mariners have stumbled out of the gate as well, so it's a bit interesting what's going on there. And I guess the Mets' struggles this year, being an extension of the struggles they had after the start of June last year. I think we're seeing a lot of things go wrong there. Those are some of the stories that I'm following.
Jay, isn't the Cardinals the biggest?
The Cardinals,
surprise?
I think the Cardinals are a nice surprise. Yes,
Okay.
we thought this would be a year of rebuilding for them as well. But they've produced a lot of young talent in recent years that just had not hit its stride, and suddenly things are coming together for Jordan Walker, for example, and they are looking like a reasonably strong team in a division where I think, one of the expected leaders, the Cubs, have had pitching injuries galore and a lot of problems on the offensive side as well.
So let me jump in with one follow up before Eric jumps in here. On the Phillies, you mentioned in the article, this is one of the best stats I've come across in a while. You mentioned the Don Mattingly start whenever he came in as a replacement manager, ran 16-4, like the first 20 games, 16-4. This is the best first 20 games for a replacement manager since 1880. It's almost 150 years, Jay
Yeah.
tells us. It's absolutely unbelievable that baseball goes back that we have a stat. We have a first time since 1880, almost 150 years. Jay, we talked about this a little bit on the show last week. Can you tell us from your wise baseball history perspective, what happens when a guy comes in and the club responds this way? Like, how much of it is the manager effect, and why does the manager have an effect? We thought the baseball managers didn't do that much. They just turn in a lineup card.
Yeah, I don't put a ton of stock into the idea that this is that Mattingly is suddenly doing things that are different than what Rob Thompson was doing. I mean, Mattingly was the bench coach there. He should have been a better bench coach for this first 28 games of the season or whatever it was. Um, but I think managers wear out their welcomes, and sometimes I think there's a tendency, to tune guys out, and for there to be, I think, small fissures in the clubhouse where you're just not connecting the same way that you did. We know that there was at least one personnel conflict that Rob Thompson had with Nick Castellanos, who the Phillies let go at the beginning of spring training or just before he reported to spring training because they couldn't find anybody to take his $19 million salary. But there may have been other stuff going on behind the scenes that we haven't heard about. And, um, but the reality is that the Phillies did very well under Thompson, won 58% of the time since he took over in early 22, won a pennant under him, looked like they were bound for yet another playoff berth. Um, and just weren't playing up to their potential. And so a lot of what's happened since Mattingly took over is just positive regression. And it's maybe guys, uh, hearing a different voice, or just not thinking about the conflict they have with the last guy, or not thinking about this shit again, whatever. You're just the way you tune somebody out when you're just kind of sick of hearing what they have to say, even when you know that they're right. um so I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that, and we really should not overlook this, with regards to the turnaround, is that the Phillies, right around, just before Thompson was fired, Zach Wheeler returned from a recovery from thoracic outlets syndrome surgery, and he replaced Taiwan Walker, who had a 9+ ERA, and Wheeler has pitched like an ace with a 1.67 ERA. I mean, that's a huge swing once every 5 days, and it has downstream effects because of the way you're getting you're getting better relievers in there. You're pitching deeper into games. You're not using your bullpen as much with that, and so your bullpen's able to cover some more ground. You've also got Christopher Sanchez suddenly on a roll, 37 2/3 scoreless innings. So just the Phillies suddenly are getting great pitching, and that's the real difference.
Okay, great. Eric wants to jump in.
I'm just going to have a comment on what Jay said. By the way, the binomial probability, back to your regression issue, of a 9-19 team, if their true strength is roughly around 500, that's only 3.8%. It's not that rare, let's just say. So it's not like they were 2-26 and
Right.
all of a sudden. So that's just one comment. But the second thing I was going to ask you is, going back to the Dodgers, did they have a luxury as two-time defending champions in the sense of, all right, so the Padres beat us in the regular season. Who really cares? Like, as long as we're healthy and our lineup is set for the postseason, that's what we should care about. In other words, should they be maximizing a different objective function, maybe than other teams that aren't sitting there with both the quality of the team they have and 2 championships in the bank?
Yeah, I think we saw that last year. I mean, the Dodgers were not nearly as strong a regular season team last year as they were in 2024, and they didn't push themselves as hard. Their focus was on getting their starting pitching healthy for the playoffs. And they really slow walked the rehabs of both Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell, and they wanted to make sure those guys were available down the stretch, and they were. They actually had such a surplus of starting pitching by the end of the season, with Shohei Ohtani also rehabbing from his elbow reconstruction, that they were sending starters to the bullpen.
And
They had
I think they are. I feel like the Dodgers. I don't know if it's an organizational strategy or if it's just the way it is, but I think they are more tolerant. That they'll sign 14 guys that like 7 of which have real injury like histories instead of just avoiding those. And they'll have seasons like a couple years ago where they barely made it to the postseason with any starters, and then last year it ended up the luck was better with them and they had a surplus. But with even in signing people like Glasnow, Snell, you're signing up
yes.
for that. Like, only half these guys are going to be
Yeah,
available come playoff time
they have,
anyway.
because they have because they can spend so much money, and they're not afraid to spend so much money because they're practically printing it over in Japan. With the benefits of Otani and Yamamoto and Sasaki, they can take on more risk, and they've done that. And at the same time, they've also continued to produce useful major league pitchers from their farm system, from their drafts, and to trade for some as well. And so, they've got decent filler guys to help them ride out the leaner spots. Last year we saw the Padres give them chase for most of the season, and the Dodgers, they didn't go out and make a huge deadline deal. They didn't go out and they didn't panic, and it ended up being that they had to win an extra round of playoffs. They waxed the Reds in the wild card series, but I think they got kind of lucky with the draw with the Phillies, who didn't have Wheeler, who were suddenly without Wheeler, and who had some other built-in flaws, and had never figured out how to get a productive outfield on that team last year. And then, of course, you've got the Kerkering play, and the great wheel play, that defensive play that they put in. And that series was closer than the final 3-1 outcome. And from there, the Dodgers just rolled. I mean, they just didn't look like they had much trouble in the excuse me, in the NLCS. The World Series was, one of the all-time classics, and that one, could have gone either way down to the final pitch. So, it just worked out for them.
Odd.
Okay, so United did a nice overview of the season, but one of the things that and we always ask ourselves is what makes a team a perpetual winner? And Cade, you talked about maybe the general manager, the manager doesn't count. Who does this? But the theme for me right now is something that I point out every year when I teach this to my students, where we do a payroll adjusted team quality score over the last 25 years. And if you do that, there are 3 teams that just stick out, starting with the A's, followed by the Braves and the Cardinals. And there they are again, doing it again. You didn't mention the A's. I reminded you about the Cardinals. What do you think about these teams? You were talking about, there's so many years of, not every year, of course, but just on aggregate, so
quick,
frequently.
I thought the Guardians were in there as well. Are they not?
The Guardians are not quite for 25 years. They're more recent. So if you go back to the start of my data set, goes back to after the last strike, so 95.
I might have said the Rays. Also.
And the Rays are also, but the Rays are also much more recent. They were horrible for the first,
Yeah.
So those are the. And so, what is it about these teams? Is it analytics? Is it farm system? Is it ownership? What
I think it's different. I think it's different in those cases. I think the A's, the name of your podcast, I think, is still a reminder of the A's got a huge advantage from being early adopters when it came to analytics in the so-called Moneyball era, and they have always done their best to try to get as much of an edge as they can, despite being underfinanced and despite now being nomadic. And they've had to invest in perpetually turn over the roster and invest in young talent. And right now they've got some of the best young talent they've had in a while. There's still only 27 and 27 in an AL West where the Astros and Mariners are having, serious problems. But they've done well for themselves. I mean, the Cardinals, I think, are maybe less analytically inclined, more farm system oriented. We've seen that farm system, I think, dry up somewhat in recent years. Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman, and I think were, until this year, pretty much busts in terms of what they'd given to the Cardinals at the major league level the last few years, and that really held the team back. Um, and the free agent investments they made, or the veteran acquisitions that they stuck out for, like yeah, Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, kind of went south a little bit more quickly than we would have expected. Um, Braves, though, they're a great example. I mean, they've done a magnificent job of uh, growing. Through the farm system, they always seem to come up with more pitching. They made some great trades. I mean, you know, it was a shock when they let Freddie Freeman jump to the Dodgers. Um, but the Braves made a great trade for Matt Olson, who's a guy who can hit 50 bombs in a season and plays better defense than any other first baseman in the majors probably. Um, they gave up talent for that, including the A's Shea Langoliers, the catcher. But they came up with another catcher of their own in Drake Baldwin, last year's NL Rookie of the Year. Um, and they had a bad year last year, but they are, right back in contention this year. And despite some injuries to the pitching staff, they've been without Spencer Schwellenbach. They've had, they were without Spencer Strider for a while. They had some other injuries in there. Yeah, they look like they're back to being, the perpetual contenders that we assumed they were coming into last year.
Mm-hmm. Jay, let's chat a little bit. I know the boys want to ask you Hall of Fame questions, and let me just start with a simple question for the least Hall of Fame oriented person here. What is different about your WAR model? So the Jaffe
Well,
WAR model, JAWS, what is
yeah.
different?
So it's not just war. War is the currency that I use, but I measure players uh using both their career war and their peak war, which I define as a player's best 7 seasons at large, not necessarily consecutive. Because uh peak ability and peak performance really is, I think, what separates the goods from the greats. Those huge seasons that help propel a team towards a pennant.
Hold on, can I
Um,
can I react real quickly? Why 7? I might have thought peak would be more peaked than 7.
Right. In
Well,
fact,
it was basically a sweet spot that I kind of found. I originally when I started with Jaws um, back in 2003, when I was at Baseball Prospectus, or early 2004, I guess I should say. Um, I was using best 5 years consecutively, with some minor adjustments for injuries and military service, because you got a lot of guys who missed a few
Mhm.
key prime years there. I changed that to best of 7. I moved on from Baseball Prospectus and switched to Baseball References version of WAR. Um, 7 seemed to be a good spot early on, when it came to differentiating between career value and a peak value. Um, you've got a lot of guys who had a few great seasons, and you've got um, a lot of guys who had great careers. You want to try to find a measure that gives you a slightly different answer from just going
Mm-hmm.
by career war,
Yes.
that helps to explain, your short career high peak guys, like some of the ones who are, like Sandy Koufax is a good example. And the system doesn't work quite as well now, um, because the baseline for replacement level changed when I moved from BP to Baseball Reference. Um, but I've stuck with 7 because it still works pretty well. The more years you add to peak, the more it tends to resemble your career measure anyway. Like if you're going 10
Right.
years, for example,
Right.
you might as well just be measuring by 10 years.
Okay.
And if you go 5, you don't differentiate enough. Seven's just a convenient sweet spot.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Shane has a question here.
Well, I mean, since we're talking about Hall of Fame now, anyway, I have a general question. how many current Hall of Famers or how many Hall of Famers are currently playing? And is that number kind of small or big relative to historically what it's been? I mean, that's kind of a lead into maybe talking about
Yeah.
pitching and how
So
it's
okay.
changed.
So the long. If you look at the 150 plus years of Major League Baseball, what we see is roughly, when it's all said and done, you get about 1.5 to 2 Major League Hall of Famers per team per season. Um, just in terms of like, it could be as little as a few as one appearance, or as many as playing 162 games. But that's the long term average. And in the 20s to the 40s, you've got well above 2 and briefly above 3. Um, what you see when you get to the 1990s and onward is that level dips below 1 and well below 1. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that the post BBWA eligibility format, by which I mean the ERA committee and before that the Veterans Committee, just has not had its chance to admit all the players that it's going to, at any given point. So these are not settled numbers yet. But it's also true that they're just not. That even with the writers electing more players than ever in their history over a longer term, uh, the era committees are not electing as many players, and we're missing a whole bunch of players because of steroid related performance and infractions, and so we've lost some. So my assumption generally is that we're probably looking at roughly 1 to 1.3 Hall of Famers per team. Uh, so we should be looking at about 40 future Hall of Famers at any given time. Now, I don't think we're actually going to get to that number. I think you're probably looking at somewhere closer to 25 or so future Hall of Famers, and many of whom we can name off the top of our heads, and some of whom I think will come out of the pack and surprise us with their, incredible resilience or whatever. Um
Just so you know, Shane, I had a feeling you might ask this question. The only reason I say that is because I literally have up on my screen, because I was thinking someone might ask this, because I was going to ask Jay a related question. There are currently 15 major league players with a WAR of 53 and above. And by the way, that 15th right now is Jose Altuve, who I think most of us think is likely to be a Hall of Famer.
yeah.
But then you have guys, yeah, for sure. But then you have guys like, oh, as this is Jay's other point, like Juan Soto, who's not there yet, but he's very obviously very likely to get there. But I'd say for me, I was going to ask Jay a similar question, Shane. I think there's a lot more Hall of Famers right now than I've seen in the last 10 years. I mean, I think there's easily, I would have thought, I'm glad you told me her historical numbers. I would have said the fact that there's 20 to 25 guys now playing that are very likely to make the Hall of Fame. I thought that was a big number, but you're saying that's not, wouldn't be a historic.
Historically speaking, it's not. I mean, I don't know how it compares exactly to recent years because, again, we're working with about a 30-year lag when it comes to that stuff, even for to get I think a usable number. And uh even so, when you're talking about, a 5-year waiting period and a 10-year eligibility period, you've got a minimum of a 15-year lag for some of this stuff to resolve itself. So it's tough. I think we have changed the way that the BBWA functions in terms of recognizing good candidates soon, for the Hall of Fame sooner. We had a swell, it was something like 22 players elected over a 6 or 7 year period there, which was the largest surge in recent history. And that was even with, so many candidates being rejected for their PED connections. Um, we saw guys get in on the strength of WAR instead of just their career offensive totals. Guys who maybe did not get to play until they're 40 and approach 3,000 hits. Guys like Larry Walker and Scott Rowland and Todd Helton, who put up elite numbers in part because they were very good defensively as well. Um, they didn't necessarily reach the major offensive milestones that would have put them into the Hall. But the era committees, function differently and largely outside of the BBWA's purview. We contribute, a few voters per cycle, but the Hall of Fame itself is who's choosing that voting body, and its behaviors, as I've documented before, are quirky to say the least, and subject to the Hall's heavy hand when it comes to picking who actually serves on those committees. So,
Interesting.
um, I don't think everything, things have changed quite as much there in that way.
Okay. Odd.
All right, so I have a bunch of things to talk about. I'm going to go backwards in time and point out that I also think 7 is too long, but I would also say that I think it probably needs to differ by position, so that particularly, say, starting pitchers, I would imagine a shorter period of dominance is it could define the peak, as opposed to maybe a hitter where you might want to have a little bit longer. I built my own Hall of Fame metric for starting pitchers. And we call it based on grid war, which is a war calculated on a per game basis. It's only for starting pitchers. And the couple of curiosities that come out of it is, I'll just say, I've talked about this on our show. There's one pitcher that is so firmly in the top group, in the deserving pile, that's not in it. And it's not Roger Clemens because of other reasons. That's Kevin Brown. And I want to ask you about that, because people will say the PDE usage, yes, he was in the Mitchell report, but he's certainly not in that top tier or even second tier of known kind of abusers of performance enhancing drugs. So he was blown away on his first round, and most people point to the fact that he never won Cy Youngs. He's so good because of modern analytics. It goes back and looks what he did at the time he did it and say, my God, he's not Pedro, but he's not that far behind, at least in terms of his peak in the late 90s. And he had a wonderfully long career. He was terrific. It put together a huge career.
So, I enjoyed him immensely on the 04 Yankees.
Yeah, you did. That was past his prime. But what do you? So I guess I want to reflect on Kevin Brown, and then my next question would be, which starting pitcher is most deserving that is not in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, well, let me preface that by saying that starting pitching is an area that is kind of in a crisis when it comes to the Hall of Fame stuff. And that's why I think one more reason why we're going to fall short of the historic averages is because the way that pitcher workloads have changed, these guys, we're seeing the disappearance of the 200 inning guy, to say nothing of the 20 win guy. And so we're getting shorter careers. These guys are throwing harder. They're more susceptible to injury. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. And traditional, my traditional Jaws does not do a great job because it's kind of overbalanced towards these heavy workload guys.
Mm-hmm.
I've sort of adjusted for that by capping each player's peak season at 250 innings and scaling down for that. And even then, after Clayton Kershaw, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, and Zach Greinke disappear from the scene, it's not obvious who the next Hall of Fame starting pitcher is going to be. Chris Sale.
Chris Sale, Garrett
Chris
Cole,
Sale
maybe?
is probably, well, yeah. I would have said Garrett Cole before the Tommy John surgery. Now I think Chris Sale's probably surpassed him, but Sale's probably not going to get to 200 wins.
No,
And we haven't had a starting pitcher elected with fewer than 200 wins. And pitcher wins are not a great measure of value and excellence, but just as a common benchmark, I think we're seeing a big change there. Now back to Kevin Brown. Brown had the Mitchell report working against him. He also had kind of a crash and burn with that 7-year, $105 million contract because he was injured so often. Before that, yeah, he was one of the top pitchers in the game. The other thing, though, besides the turning his hand into a maraca during the 2004 ALCS collapse by the Yankees, is Brown loathed the media and vice versa, and wasn't going to get an inch of slack from the voters, and so it really wasn't that surprising particularly just because of the Mitchell report that he went one and done. Andy Pettit, on the other hand, perceived as a nice guy, also in the Mitchell report, nowhere near as good a pitcher as
Brown,
Kevin
yeah.
Brown was at his peak, but had longevity, had a lot of postseason accomplishments to his name, and has stuck around long enough that I wouldn't predict him for the Hall based on the fact that he does still have the
Hey, look,
PED.
Jay, I would put I for me, but don't listen to me. I would put Jacob DeGrom and I would put King Felix in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, those are shorter career guys, and it's
I'm
going to
okay with
take
that. I'm
it's go it's go
perfectly
it's
okay.
it's going to. I mean, we saw Felix get above 50% this year. It's going to take it's taking a change in the electorate's thinking to start to come around to these shorter career guys, and I think we're seeing the tip of it here. I don't know that it gets down to Jacob DeGrom and fewer than 100 wins. But it may well get down to Felix Hernandez and what is 150 wins, give or take, with the excellence that he had.
So
I think the thing is though is you have to go back is once you start electing those guys, you have to rethink all the guys from the last 40 years who came and went, who were every bit as dominant as Felix,
yep.
and didn't have as long a careers as the 300 game winners who did get elected. I'm thinking about guys like Johan Santana,
Yeah.
who went one and done.
Come on, you
Dave
got to mention.
Stieb,
There it is. That's the
Dave
man.
Stieb, who was, who was probably the best pitcher of the 1980s,
Yeah.
but never even won a Cy Young. David Cohn, even Dwight Gooden, ups and downs, all in there.
Great point. These are all good
There are a
names.
lot of great pitch and the way that the era committees are set up, there is really no way that we can equitably reconcile that lost generation or two of pitchers, and whether they're fit for the Hall with whether we're talking about Andy Pettit or Felix Hernandez or Jacob DeGrom. You got guys that are clearly superior to them that we're never going to get a chance to vote for because they went one and done on the era committee on the BBWA ballots, and those guys generally don't get reconsidered by the era committee, and when they do, they're long shots. They're rounding out the ballots. Um, Ted Simmons is the only one to go that route and get in the Hall of Fame, and he had a significant booster on the era committee in Rick Hummel, the longtime uh,
But so
beat writer for the Cardinals, and it takes almost a miracle to get in.
But you have to present it as like a rethinking. Like so,
Oh
not
yeah,
only
no,
is
we are.
you have to present it like Kevin Brown was not considered. Obviously, he was an expert. He didn't like the media and Mitchell report, but he didn't. I mean, you look at his career and. He was never considered the dominant pitcher of his era until you recognize that he had no run support and that all of a sudden wins wasn't the only way to judge a pitcher. And it's like a reflection on how we actually think of pitcher quality has to be retroactively moved backwards. I mean, you
Well,
can't. I mean, you can't think of Jacob DeGrom as good as he is. Santana was better. I mean,
Yeah, but I think
I mean, look,
Felix
it's not that
Hernandez
the people,
sounds
it's not
more
that we
like
didn't
that.
recognize that Kevin Brown was not a great pitcher. I mean, he had won 2 ERA titles, was second and third, and a bunch of sixth in the Cy Young Award. Led the league in WAR twice, B WAR that is. He was in those conversations. He just, there were other great pitchers at the time, like Randy Johnson and Mike Messina and whoever that helped steal the thunder. Um, but I do think that some of it just still comes down, unfortunately, to personality. And because the era committee can be selective, or because the committee that makes the ballot for the era committee to to process can be as selective as they want, I don't see that they're going to I don't see that they're going to give Kevin Brown a shot. That's the
yeah,
problem. They can look at Kevin Brown and say, yeah, he's a Mitchell report guy. He's never going to get in because we keep voting down all these guys, who tested positive or who were in the Mitchell report or whatever. They have every excuse to not put him on there and just recycle somebody else. And I'm not saying that's fair. I'm just saying that's the reality that I'm up against.
We'll let Jay go. We've got him up here longer than we expected to have him, and it was great talking to you, Jay. Appreciate you making time for us. Jay Jaffe, senior writer for FanGraphs, author of the Cooperstown Casebook, creator of Jaws, the Jaffe War Score, a Hall of Fame voter, member of BBWAA, often guest on MLB Network. Great guy to follow if you're interested in baseball and baseball analytics. That's been the show. That's been this week's show. Appreciate you being here for the whole crew. Adi Wyner, Shane Jensen, Eric Bradlow. This has been Cade Massey. For Aaron Tran running the board today for us, Dee Patel, the boss lady, in here in the studio with us. Appreciate it. And to Marissa Reyna, our producer. Thanks to you guys, the listeners. Come back and join us next time. Between now and then, enjoy your sports.